understand. I can't ask words. Let me mute.
A pleasant good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Department of History and Archaeology's annual CSEC lecture series. This morning, we will have the first of 3 sessions today. And if anyone is unable to join us on Zoom, if anyone is unable to join us on Zoom, we're streaming live on our YouTube channel, History UWIMONA. Our presenter for this session this morning is Dr. Enrique Okenve, the head of the department, and he will be speaking on West African societies in the 15th century. Dr. Okenve, over to you.
Pleasant good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Dr. Nelson, and welcome everybody here on whether you're joining us from Zoom or whether you're joining us from YouTube. We don't have much time and we are starting, it's already a little bit late, so I'm just going to skip the preambles and just like start sharing the PowerPoint with you so I can take you through some of the ideas that I want to discuss with you this morning. As you know, the topic is West African societies in the 15th century. So without further ado, let me just share the screen so we can begin. All right. So before anything, let me just apologize because I don't think I'll be able to cover everything that I wanted to discuss with you. This is a relatively difficult topic in some ways, and obviously perhaps the main challenge of it is that is very broad, and it's also perhaps the other challenges that is circumscribed to the 15th century. Our knowledge, and this is one of the things that I want all of your students, young students of history, to understand, is that our knowledge of these early stages of African history, it's somewhat limited. It's not, it's quite broad in many ways, but it's somewhat limited in the sense that sometimes some of the historical developments that took place, we're not able to pinpoint exactly when they happened and so on. So because of that, what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to take you through these early stages of African history. Basically, I want to focus on political and economic developments that took place in this part of the African continent, in and around from the 10th, 11th century onwards. And I'm going to discuss with you fundamentally the economic and political developments that took place. And I'll tell you a little bit about the religion, not as much as I would have liked to prepare, but I unfortunately didn't have enough time. And finally, I will just tell you a little bit about society. I think I could not find the slides this morning, but I will tell you about it. And if anything, if anybody's interested, later on, I can find the slides and share with your teachers. But anyway, without further ado, let's begin. West African societies in the 15th century. One of the things that came to my mind when I look at the topic is why the 15th century? I'm not sure if anybody in the house can tell me, if has any idea of why is the 15th century that was chosen and not maybe the 16th, the 18th, or maybe the 12th century. Why the 15th century? Does anybody have an idea as to why this is the period that was chosen for this part of the syllabus? I'm looking here at the list of attendees and participants. I don't see anybody raising a hand. So let's perhaps let me try to speculate a little bit. And this is part of what we do in history. In history, we sometimes speculate, and we speculate obviously is informed speculation. But let me try to speculate a little bit as to why I think it's the 15th century. I believe the 15th century is chosen as the preamble to the arrival of the Europeans to the Caribbean and the Americas, and of course as a preamble to the beginning of the transatlantic trade in slave Africans. In some ways, it's almost like the assumption is okay, if we want to know what our ancestors were like before arriving in the Americas, we should look at the 15th century. And that is true. The 15th century is an important period to understand what West African societies were like, what obviously your ancestors and the societies in which your ancestors came from were like. But I mean, it is a little bit misleading. It's a bit misleading because, of course, your ancestors did not leave the African continent or were not taken or removed from the African continent at one particular moment in time. They were taken over several centuries. So in many cases, what I'm trying to say with this is that if you want to understand better what the societies and of your ancestors were like before they were forcibly removed from the African continent, not only you need to look at the 15th century, you also need to look at the 16th century, the 17th century, the 18th century. Into the 19th century, we know that Africans were being taken from the African continent into the Caribbean, right? So it is a dynamic period. And of the transatlantic trade is a dynamic period. Africans are being removed at different stages and so on. So all of this period of African history is also part of your history. And of course, even before the 15th century is also part of your history. All right, with that being said, let me try to explain a little bit about the economies of the region. Some of you might think, oh, well, economy is sort of boring and so on. I am a social historian, and as a social historian, I'm fundamentally examining, social developments and changes and basically the common people and so on. But I think over time, I've come to appreciate more and more the importance of the economies. And if we examine our life in the present, we know that many of the things that shape our societies have to do with economic developments and economic transformations and so on. So this has always been the case. And in many ways, to understand some of the crucial political and social changes that took place in the African continent, in West Africa, we need to look at some of those economic developments, because those economic developments or changes trigger a series of social and political changes that shape this part of the history of the African continent. So before anything, let me just give you a little bit of insight into much earlier developments that you have to be aware of. As students of history, obviously you will not have to write up about this when it comes to, exam questions and things like that, but you need to be knowledgeable of it. And what is it that you need to understand? Well, the impact of agriculture, the discovery of agriculture. Just very recently, I was explaining to my students here in the Department of History and Archaeology at the UW-Mona that contrary to what younger generations or younger people, earlier generations, that were taught, the discovery of agriculture did not happen in one place in the world. Agriculture was discovered by different peoples in different parts of the world at different stages. And that is the case also in Africa. Agriculture was developed or discovered in at least 3 parts of the African continent. I want to focus on 2 main parts of the African continent. One is the southeastern Sahara region, right? And the other one is the West African region in and around the Nile River and in and around the Niger River in West Africa. The Nile River, of course, in Northeast Africa, East Africa, that's where we see significant developments early on from 10,000 years ago. And later on, about 8,000 years ago, we start seeing these developments in West Africa along the Niger River region. And you can see there on the slide that I say early discovery of agriculture in Africa, circa 8,000, 6,000, between 8,000, 6,000 before the Common Era, BCE. And these are things that you need to be familiar with when it comes to, studying history books and so on. How do we date things? 8,000, 6,000 BCE. That's before the Common Era. All people know this as before Christ and so on. Obviously, it's the birth of Christ that marks the so-called Common Era. So 8,000 BCE. before the birth of Christ means that it in and around 10,000 years ago, right? Because it's been like over 2,000 years since the birth of Christ. So 8,000 before his birth is about 10,000 years ago. As early as 10,000 years ago, East African peoples were in and around what is known today as the Sahara Desert. They started to discover agriculture little by little, very slowly, very gradually, and so on. And I say the Sahara, and you say, how come they did this in the Sahara region? Well, because at that time, the Sahara was not a desert. At that time, the Sahara, it was a very lush, fertile part of the African continent, right? And it's shortly after that we start seeing the beginning of the desertification, and of course now the advance of the desert as we know it today, right? Farther to the west, we see the discovery of agriculture in the area, in areas of probably what it may have been northern Nigeria, all of that area close to the Niger River and so on. Significant developments took place there, like the domestication, the ability to domesticate and cultivate yams, right? And that's a significant development for people like us here in Jamaica, because yam are part of our staples, right? So, what is important? Why do I bring up these very, very early historical developments? Because agriculture is crucial. Without agriculture, the societies as we know today will not exist. So agriculture is at the beginning of the crucial developments of that led to significant transformations. The society is becoming becoming bigger. Society is becoming more complex. Political formations also developing into more complex societies and political systems. That is a result or an outcome of the discovery in agriculture. But of course, it's not the discovery of agriculture. It's mostly the thousands of years later when our ancestors started to master how to grow food and how to generate surplus, not just like and so on. And that took many years. It took several thousands of years before they were able to master the techniques to produce food in enough quantities and so on, let alone to produce surplus and so on. But once they were able to do that, the ability to produce surplus is going to lead to significant changes. One of the first significant changes of that agriculture was able to introduce is the development of establishment of permanent and semi-permanent settlements. That is, rather than we stopped being nomadic peoples and then we started to settle in the same area. And that is crucial because being in the same area started to transform as social interaction. It favored population growth and so on. Right. So fast forward like several thousand years, soon before, a couple of hundred years before the birth of Christ, in and around the 200 BCE, we're still seeing that in parts of West Africa, food production surplus led to the development of early towns. From before the birth of Christ, we see the development of early towns in parts of West Africa. Of course, in other parts of Africa, in the areas of Egypt, in the area and so on, we see the development of towns way earlier. But in West Africa, is and around this is happening in and around the year 200 and before the Common Era, and this is very much a result of the expansion of agriculture and the ability of your West African ancestors to master food production and generate surplus, being able to settle in spaces that become larger in early towns like this, like Okenve. Okenve is perhaps the best known early town in West Africa. It emerged as an important urban center, like urban and commercial center in and around the year 300 of the Common Era. So 300 years, so 500 years since Okenve was first inhabited, 500 years later, it's now a central urban area in West Africa, and not only because of its ability to produce food, but because also it's becoming a commercial center, right? And that is a significant development that I want you to be aware of. We're going to talk a little bit more about trade. We're going to spend a lot of more time talking about trade because trade is crucial to the political developments that took place in West Africa. And of course, to the developments that took place later on with the rise of the transatlantic trade, which we will not be seeing here today. What is another thing that I want to bring to your attention? Because, okay, so agriculture, you have to think about agriculture as a technological innovation in a sense, basically, right? You might not really appreciate how much it takes, right? But I mean, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, we were hunter-gatherers. And it's only like in the last 10,000 years or so that we were able to start to control the process, to control nature to the extent of being able to produce food. That was a significant innovation, right? What was another significant innovation that is crucial to understand developments in West Africa? It's metalworking. The development of ironworking technology in West Africa that took place in the last few centuries before the birth of Christ, right? That is a significant innovation. Just like agriculture, oftentimes we say, oh, other parts of the world develop ironworking or metalworking techniques and technologies earlier. It doesn't matter when they did. The important thing is that these techniques and this technology was developed in Africa independently. Right? So that's what you need to be aware of. Just like in other parts of the world, the discovery of agriculture, the discovery of metalworking, it's not just happening in one place. It's happening in different places independently from each other at different stages throughout history. And so what we know is that in the case of West Africa, in the last few centuries before the Common Era or before the birth of Christ, we see there's evidence that Africans were already started producing iron tools and so on, right? And what with ironworking, you have to think about why it was so significant, because what ironworking did is that increased our ancestors' ability to farm and hunt more efficiently. I remember there were farmers and obviously hunters as well, and they were producing food. But I mean, your ability to produce more and more food and more efficiently had to do a lot with the tools. And if you had more resistant tools like iron tools and so on, that will give you an edge. So ironworking was crucial in terms of increasing our farming and hunting efficiency. This ironworking technology, of course, favored productivity, economic productivity. We were able to produce more. And then that's the surplus that I'm telling you. The surplus is what we are going to trade with, right? We might be subsistent farmers for a while, but if we're able to produce more than we actually need to feed our families, then we can sell it, right? And that is at the core of trade, and that is at the core of economic growth, if you like. To this day, right? Trade is crucial. Trade is what explains the wealth of nations. You might have diamonds, you might have gold, you might have whatever, coltan, whatever it is, but if there's no demand, if there is no a trade network to exchange this, that iron that you have or that gold that you have, it is worthless. What makes it worthy is when other peoples are demanding, and there are like networks that facilitate the exchange of this goods and so on, the trade basically, right? So the ironworking technology, as I said, favored the economic productivity, the ability to produce, to grow surplus, agricultural surplus, and this obviously will have significant economic implications, and as we will see, also political and social implications. Ironworking knowledge, in many cases, like West Africans realized how important it was. And because of that, ironworking knowledge it became linked to religious ceremonies, right? It's that knowledge, it was almost like knowledge granted by the gods, and it was not knowledge that was just like easily shared. You have to be a chosen one. There have to be a series of rituals in which like this knowledge and technology will be passed on from one person to another, right? So it's just this exemplifies how much they appreciated, they realized how crucial ironworking was to the significant changes that were taking place in these societies. For many centuries, ironworking knowledge continued to be associated to religious beliefs and religious ceremonies and so on. Right. Of course, in addition to the economic productivity, ironworking also increased military efficiency, and that will be crucial because when I start talking to you in a minute or two about the more than 1 minute or two, sorry. But when I start talking to you about the political developments, the rise of the early kingdoms and empires, obviously that the rise of these kingdoms and empires was possible because also of military power, right? So ironworking in that sense will also be crucial. Early West African states, as I say here, developed among ironworking communities. The first ones of these early West African states, like Ghana, right? Ghana, that I will tell you a little bit more about it later. And Ghana, not to be mistaken or confused with the modern day Ghana. This is a different Ghana. This is the original Ghana, if you prefer, right? So it is within these communities, ironworking communities, that we start seeing that the development of early states, kingdoms, if you prefer. And it's as a result of what I told you, is their ability to become more efficient producers, but also as their ability to become more efficient militarily, whether it is for defense or for offense and so on. And that gave them the edge. So we have agriculture, we have metalworking, and as I said, then we are kind of ready. We are producing more. We're able to produce more. We're able to produce surplus. And that gives us our ability to now trade, right? And trade is going to be crucial, because trade is what is going to transform, it's going to transform these societies even more. We're going to see then the expansion of settlements, the development of urban centers, and there's those urban centers where they are fundamentally, they are commercial centers. That's what they really are, right? And in addition to that, we are going to see also the expansion of political power that is trying to secure resources or trying to secure control over trade routes and so on. And they're expanding territorially, and as a result of expanding territorially, we're going to see the formation of kingdoms, but also empires. So what is happening here as it relates to trade? Well, we say that early urban centers, trade centers, early urban centers became involved in regional trade in West Africa, right? So local and regional centers were trading with each other in West Africa. We have evidence of early trans-Saharan trade, right? And by trans-Saharan trade, I'm not talking necessarily from south of the Sahara into North Africa, crossing completely the desert, but mostly trade between Saharan communities that live in the Sahara and communities that live south of the Sahara. And we have evidence of this during the first centuries of the Common Era. So soon after the birth of Christ, there is evidence that communities from the Sahara Desert are trading with communities of the Sahel. As I say here, the Sahel is that region south of the Sahara. The Sahel is an Arabic term that is used to refer to that region south of the Sahara and so on. So we have evidence, we have found, archaeologists have found evidence of these exchanges between Saharan communities and communities south of the Sahara from during the first centuries of the Common Era, right? What is important about it? Well, that they are trading, and they are trading because there is a demand for goods that exist in one part of West Africa and goods that doesn't exist in another part of Sahara, the African continent, so of West Africa. So Saharan, what they are trading, the Saharan communities are exchanging salt. They have salt there. There's salt mines, right? And salt mines salt is important in terms of food preservation, but it's also important as later on become important in terms of like building. They will use salt chunks to build and so on. So that salt fundamentally is important in terms of food preservation and obviously also for cooking and so on. And that salt came from the Sahara. But the people in the Sahara, as you can imagine, in the desert, did not have much food. And that comes from the south, from the Sahel region, right? So that ability to connect with each other and see what it is that you have that I don't, and what it is that I need, right? It's what led to this early trade between these communities. And what will lead to the expansion of this trans-Saharan trade, it will be the introduction of the camel. The camel is going to be crucial. As you can understand, the problem with the Sahara, the trade across the Sahara, it's the inability to carry large loads. And obviously the problem is that the regular animals like oxen, like horses or donkeys, they cannot go very long distances without water. The camel, however, can. and it is going to be the expansion of the camel that is going to make this possible. All right, so with the introduction of the camel, and this is happening from the 4th, 5th century. I didn't mention it here. Forgive me for that. It's not on my slide. But from the 4th, 5th century of the Common Era, we see the introduction of the camel in the region, and that will lead to the expansion of this trans-Saharan trade. And what is it that the expansion will lead to? Well, to the exchange of growing number of goods. Of course, salt, copper, iron, clothes, slaves, gold, and gold will be important, as we will see shortly, when it comes to a different, what we know as the trans-Saharan trade. Okay, so the trans-Saharan trade, right? It's something that is going to develop fundamentally with the Arab conquest of North Africa. So we can see a great expansion of the trade in the region. So our conquest of North Africa took place from the 7th century of the Common Era, from the 600s, right? 639, the year 639, we see the conquest of Egypt by Arab forces. Within a century, they have gained control, or within less than a century actually, because by the year 700 or so, they had gained control of all of North Africa. And it's going to be the presence, the establishment of the Arabs in North Africa that is going to be crucial to the development of full-blown trans-Saharan trade. Arab demand is going to make possible to connect the West African trade that already existed before the arrival of the Arabs in North Africa, and as I just mentioned, so that our Arab demand is going to make possible to connect that West African trade to the Mediterranean and the Middle Eastern trades. And these are probably some of the most richest commercial trades in the world, especially in the Middle East. For many thousands of years, several thousands of years, has been a very rich area as a result of the trade. What is going to boost the trans-Saharan trade is going to be fundamentally the increase in gold demand. It is the increase in gold demand that will lead to the expansion of the trans-Saharan trade from the 9th century, from the year 800, from the 800s onwards. And what we know is that will make possible it will trigger further political expansion or territorial expansion in the area, and we'll see the rise of these West African states or empires, also known as Sudanic states. In these Sudanic states that are developing during this period are not developing because they are in control of the supply of these goods. What they control is the trade, the routes. They are basically middlemen between the West African producers of gold and other goods and the Arab traders from the north. So these Sudanic peoples, these Sudanic states are benefiting from the control of the trade routes in the area that are linking West Africa to North Africa, and by linking to North Africa, they're linking West Africa to the Mediterranean and to the Middle East. And from the Middle East, you are basically being connected to all the trade routes, like the Silk Route, which links like this part of the world, the Middle East, to the Far East, and so on. So West African gold, as I mentioned here, and other trade goods did not really come from the Sudan area, from the area south of the Sahara. They came from farther south, from tropical areas of West Africa, and like the gold and other trade goods came from there. And what is it that they are trading? Well, in addition to gold, and gold is obviously the fundamental thing. Gold is before the discovery of gold mines in the Americas, or before the arrival of the Europeans in the Americas, we've seen that the main source of gold during this era comes from West Africa. But in addition to that, they're trading with hides, they're trading with kola nuts. Kola nuts is basically it's kind of like what's a nut? That's the word mentioned, but it's something that it has this property of it's almost energetic, basically. They also traded in slaves, not to a significant extent, especially not during the early stages. And these slaves come from war captives. Like as we see the political expansion of some of these kingdoms and empires, these expansions are the result of warfare, and the warfare leads to, to capturing people, and there's a demand for that in the Middle East in particular, and some of those who are captives will be also sold, will be part of the trans-Saharan trade. As I said, not the main part of the trans-Saharan trade. Gold was the most important thing or good in the trans-Saharan trade. So as I say here on my final point, this trans-Saharan trade favored the rise of the early Sudanic commercial elite, but also kingdoms and empires. And this is an important thing. I won't have much time to talk about social development, but one of the things that you need to realize is that in these societies, what we see is the development of two fundamental elite groups. One is the trading, the commercial class, and the other one is, of course, the political elite. So these are the two elite groups in society, and then you have the rest of the population. I'm going to show you a map before I skip out for 1 minute because somebody's at the door and I need to do something. This is a map that you can look at it clearly, and it's linking all of these areas here, which is the Sudan region, where you see Timbuktu, Jenne, and so on. But the gold basically comes from farther south, from Bambouk, from Gorwe, and from Kumasi. I'll be right back. All right, apologies. So that was your that's what I have to say about the trans-Saharan trade. And then I'm going to very quickly talk to you about the early Atlantic trade, which will be obviously something that is developing later on, and is developing from the mid 15th century, from the mid 1400s. And as you know, and that's why I'm not going to spend much time with this, as you know, it is the Portuguese that favor or make possible the development of this early Atlantic trade before. And I call it early Atlantic trade, not the transatlantic trade, because we're not dealing yet with the crossing of the Atlantic from the eastern hemisphere to the western hemisphere. So the Portuguese seafaring, as you know, these explorations are crucial to the development of this early Atlantic trade. The Portuguese, as you know, they were interested in circumnavigating the African continent, so they could reach Asia, but they were also interested in finding the. One second, sorry guys. Sorry, so this is the challenge with doing this from home. So as I was telling you, the Portuguese are responsible for the expansion of this early Atlantic trade. And they're not just interested in circumnavigating the African continent, they're also interested in the source of the gold. The gold was reaching the Mediterranean, and by reaching the Mediterranean, it was reaching Southern Europe, but it was reaching via the Arabs. And of course, the Portuguese are interested in gaining direct access to the gold, and they will find it. Eventually, they will find it, and they will establish themselves. They establish a base at Elmina, right? That still exists in modern day Ghana. The modern day Ghana, not the Ghana that I mentioned before and that I will mention in more detail shortly. Elmina, which means the mine, right, in Portuguese, and they established themselves there to gain direct access to the gold supplies. There, from this part of West Africa, the Akan communities will begin supplying gold to the Portuguese traders, and of course the Portuguese traders are paying by supplying copper, brass, European cloth, and so on. Later on, when the Portuguese expanded to the Indian Ocean, when they arrived in the Indian Ocean, established commercial contacts with communities in the Indian Ocean, the Portuguese will also be able to bring to West Africa Asian cloth, which will be very highly valued by West Africans, but also cowrie shells. And cowrie shells are crucial because these cowrie shells will start serving as a form of currency, and that will facilitate commercial exchanges and economic activities in West Africa because of the introduction of cowrie shells that will be used as currency. Of course, and this is the cowrie shells are controlled by the elites, right? Because the elites are the ones who are trading directly with the Portuguese, and as such, in a way, it's almost like the elites, the rulers, basically it's almost like they are controlling the coinage or the creation of these coins and the delivery of these coins into their societies. So this is an important development that took place in West Africa and that has stimulated these economies from the mid 1400s onwards. In addition to that, something that sometimes we don't know is that the Portuguese are also doing something, which is they are basically shipping goods from one part of West Africa to another. So the Portuguese are also contributing during these early stages to the commercial connections, to facilitating commercial exchanges along different parts of West Africa. Of course, the Portuguese have an advantage, which is obviously they have these large boats that can carry significant loads and relatively safely. Regardless of the perils of navigating in the sea and so on, it's still safer than transporting goods by land, which you might suffer attacks and so on. So the Portuguese have this advantage, and they are using it to transport goods from one point to another, and obviously they get a benefit out of it. And finally, the only thing I just want to tell you is obviously that we see also during this period, we're also going to see the beginning, the root of what later on will lead to the transatlantic trade in enslaved Africans, because it was the Portuguese the Portuguese demand for slaves that started to create some kind of like supply in the coastal parts of West Africa. The Portuguese initially will obtain captives from Senegambia, right? And these Senegambia, the area in and around what is today Senegal and Gambia in West Africa. And in these captives will be used for the Mediterranean sugar plantations that existed on the Mediterranean islands. In these Mediterranean islands, they're not just using African slaves, they're also using North African slaves, they're also using Eastern European slaves, and so on. So even before they were using African or sub-Saharan African slaves. So the Portuguese will contribute or add more to the supply of slaves into these Mediterranean islands by also bringing slaves from the area of Senegambia. So that was significant development. Perhaps more significant development is the establishment of the Portuguese on the island of Sao Tome, which is in the Gulf of Guinea, West Africa, because it is there, their establishment led to the formation of sugar plantations and also led to the purchase and slaves from the neighboring coast of West Africa. And in many ways, scholars argue that the rise of sugar plantation systems in the Caribbean and the Americas later on was very much a result of like the early experimentation with this type of systems that took place in places like Sao Tome. Sao Tome during the 1500s was the largest sugar producing. I mean, it's a very small island, but it became the largest sugar producing in the world at the time. So that's the early Atlantic trade. These are the early economic developments that are taking place in West Africa during this era and that are crucial to understand some of the political transformation or some of the transformations that took place. And the next transformation that I want to talk to you about has to do with politics. What is happening politically? How is these transformations translating into political change? These economic transformations are triggering social change, are also triggering political change. And that's what I want to very quickly examine with you now. What we know is, what we see is that one of the significant developments is the formation of kingdoms and later on empires in the area that historians know as the Sudan. The Sudan region is a region of like of Africa south of the Sahara, and the term Sudan obviously is also the name of the country or the countries today. But I mean that in historical terms, the term Sudan was used by the Arabs to refer to the lands south of the Sahara, to the people south of the Sahara, and so on. And Sudan in Arabic means black, right? So basically, they refer to this area south of the Sahara as Bilal al-Sudan, the land of the blacks, right? And that it was like a vast area of the African continent, south of the Sahara, and for the purpose of this lecture, we're mostly interested in the Western Sudan region, which is part of West Africa, and it is here where we're going to see significant political changes as a result of some of these economic transformations that I mentioned before. We know that early competition between rival political elites is behind the formation of early kingdoms in the region. These kingdoms, and this is something that you need to develop. I mean, sometimes we think that conflict is something that is detrimental, is something that is negative, and maybe so, but conflict is behind this type of political development. We cannot understand the formation of kingdoms, not just in Africa, but in any part of the world, without conflict. These kingdoms emerge in many ways from expansion, territorial expansion that has to do with conflict. We know that, for example, early formation of states have to do with, the ability of communities to protect themselves more efficiently, coming together and forming more unified units and stronger units as a result of that. Later on, when these units are competing against each other, sometimes what we're going to see is that those who become victorious in these conflicts will be able to conquer or to gain control over their rivals. And out of this, what we're going to see is the formation of these kingdoms. It's the incorporation of rivals into your political realm. Basically, they become under your control as a result of these conflicts, and you emerging victorious in this conflict. And something like this is what we see in West Africa, in the area of the Sudan. And we're saying this because they're competing fundamentally because there is something at stake. And what's at stake is the trade and the wealth generated by the trade, right? So what we're going to see is that with formation of these early kingdoms, not empires yet, right? We're going to see that there is a drive to control the trade routes. The trade routes, remember, if you remember the map that I mentioned, that I showed you before, all of these trade routes, what you want is to control as much territory as possible, because if you can control as much of these trade routes, right, what you can do is to tax the activities that are taking place along these trade routes. And obviously, if you're able to tax it, it means that you're able to benefit financially. And this is what these political elites are up to. So there's a drive to control the trade routes, and that is going to be behind the territorial and political expansion from in and around the 8th century of the Common Era, or the 700s, if you prefer. So political and commercial competition was common in the Sahel and the grassland regions, as I just mentioned, of West Africa. And that is going to lead initially to the emergence of the first of the significant Sudanic empires, which is Ghana. Ghana emerged as the first major empire from in and around the year 790 of the Common Era. This is not yet this is not to be mistaken, as I mentioned earlier, with modern-day Ghana. As I will show you in this map here, this is the territory in green that was the Ghana Empire. This area here, this rectangular area here is what is today modern Ghana, right? And so you'll see they're not historically connected. It's almost like maybe it's something that you can ask later. Why is it that modern day Ghana is named after Ghana when it has nothing to do with it historically or anything like that, right? Anyway, so Ghana was the first of the major empires, in this area. It was succeeded by Mali. Mali became the second major empire in the area from in and around the year 240. And forgive me for that, Songhai was the last major empire from the 1440s or thereabouts, right? So from the 1440s, we see the rise of Songhai as the largest, and it's the last of the major empires. The kingdoms and relatively smaller empires will continue in the area of West Africa for the following centuries up until I believe it's 1902. The last of the large empires was defeated by the Europeans, and that was Sokoto, right? But up until basically the early 20th century, the late 19th century, and the early 20th century, so there will be kingdoms and smaller empires in West Africa. But of the large territorial empires that developed during this era, Songhai will be the last one, and from the 1240s up until like the mid, later on, the last part of the 1500s. So as I mentioned, this is a map that shows the territory that we believe that formed Ghana, the empire of Ghana. Obviously, it's just a little bit of informed speculation. We don't know for a fact. There was no known map at the time, right? But this is the area that we believe that formed the empire of Ghana. And let me tell you a little bit about the, very quickly, you can read here some historical descriptions because this is useful. This is useful in the sense that we don't have many historical references to West African societies during this era, but this is one of the early references that we have because Arabs from the north, obviously being literate, they were writing about societies in south of the Sahara, and this is one of the descriptions that give us an idea of how powerful and how rich these empires were. So this one tells us that the king's residence comprises a palace and conical huts. The whole surrounded by a fence like a wall. Around the royal town are huts and groves of thorn trees where live the magicians who control their religious rites. Important thing, we see the connection between politics and religion. And what is even more interesting is that at some point, these rulers of Ghana will convert to Islam. However, despite they converted to Islam, it doesn't mean that they will abandon pre-Islamic religious rites or anything like that. Maybe later on you can ask why I say that they will continue with these rites even once they became Muslims. Right, what else we know about Ghana? Well, and the kingdom. None of those who belong to the imperial religion may wear tailored garments except the king himself and the heir presumptive. Like basically, you know, there's a status, a marker of status, right? And regular people or not regular people, all the elites have to distinguish themselves from the king by not wearing the type of clothes that the king is and the garment that the king is able to wear. Most of the men shave their beards, and the women, and this is important, this is an Islamic society, but the men are not growing their beards, and this is interesting because basically tell us that, well, many of they have converted to Islam, but they don't seem to follow, you know, the kind of social customs of Islam and so on. The king adorns himself with female ornaments around the neck and arms. Female ornaments. That's what the Arabs are seeing as female ornaments, right? And this tells you about how we have to take these accounts with a pinch of salt. Anytime in any student of history knows that there's always an element of bias, there's always an element of misinterpretation or misunderstanding, right? So to the Arab observer, this seems to be a female ornament. Obviously, to the locals, that's not how they see it. On his head, he was gold in embroidered caps covered with turbans of finest cotton, distinctive wearing clothing that they're wearing as marker of their status. He gives audience to the people for the redressing of grievances, and this tells us that okay, this is the role of these kings. These kings are basically arbitrators. They are like judges basically. They are peacemakers. All right, and behind him was it's 10 slaves carrying shields and swords mounted with gold. So we know that there are slaves in this society, but those slaves seem to have a different status. Those slaves are basically military officials. They are protectors of the king, right? So just when we think of slavery, we have to think about historical slavery. There are multiple forms of slavery. And especially when it comes to the case of West African societies, we know that they are a great variety of forms of slavery. And in many ways, they are very different from the ones that will develop in the Americas later on. On the right are the sons of the vassal kings, their heads plated with gold and wearing costly garments. I'm not saying this, this has not been said there, but why are the sons of vassal kings around? Why they're there with the king? Basically, the king is keeping them there to make sure that these vassal kings are actually being loyal to the king, and they are paying the tribute and so on. So these are things that we can learn from this account, and that help us understand better the political organization and this. Then on the ground around him are seated his ministers. They're sitting on the ground. So different status. Yes, you might be elite, but you're not quite like the king, whilst the governor of the city sits before him. All right, so this is told to us by al-Bakri, an Arab explorer and geographer, and this is quoted in Shillington, History of Africa, published in 2019, pages 19 to 99, if you feel looking for this book. And the last of these Sudanic empires that I want to talk to you about is Mali. Mali, if you compare to Ghana and the map here, was a much larger empire, right? And was a much larger empire in the tribe because of its ability to control territory, more commercial routes, and so on. So it included important commercial centers like Djenné, Timbuktu, Gao, and so on. One of the things that you're not seeing here, and I will mention later, is that outside the empire, there are other kingdoms that are not formally part of the empire, but they're also benefiting from being neighbors to the empire and the commercial exchanges. By controlling this territory, what you are doing is also you facilitating trade, because that control means that you are able to provide security within a very large territory. So the traders can move from one area to another safely, and that obviously is what is benefiting the expansion of the trade. So what do we know about Mali? Perhaps one of the most famous of the West African empires. We know that Mali was initially a small kingdom. We know that before it became an independent kingdom and later on an empire, was a vassal kingdom, was a subject to Ghana first. It was later on subject to the Soso Empire. And what we know is that in and around 1230, right, we see a significant development, and that significant development is the formation of Mali as an independent kingdom with King Sundiata Keita. And we have an epic that the griots to this day in the areas of Mali still tell you the story of Sundiata Keita. Sundiata Keita's story, and by the way, inspired a animated movie. Maybe later on you can tell me which one it is that it was inspired by, the story, the legend, or the epic of Sundiata Keita. We know that the Mali continued expanding, absorbing what had been formerly the Empire of Ghana, right? Remember that I told you there is always competition. So all of those territories at some point you might be a subject to Ghana, but at some point you might be actually the overlord of Ghana, which is like what will happen later on. We know about the pilgrimage to Mecca. These rulers of the Sudanic empires of Mali, in this case, they are Muslim. And in 1324 Mansa Musa, there are accounts that tell us about Mansa Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca and the display of wealth. I mean, the accounts are very rich in terms of telling us how much gold Mansa Musa was leaving behind, to the point that they say that the prices in Cairo skyrocketed during his visit because he was like spending, like so much and so on. So we have a very vivid account of Mansa Musa and his pilgrimage to Mecca. It's in the 1330s that Mali reached its peak. Right, and a few years later, we see that another Arab traveler or explorer traveled to Mali, and that will be Ibn Battuta. You can find online Ibn Battuta and look for the accounts about Mali because they're quite interesting. Ibn Battuta is a Muslim, is an Arab Muslim from North Africa, but is perplexed about the fact that these Malian people and the kings and so on, they're supposed to be Muslim, but their lifestyle and their customs have nothing to do with Islam. And Ibn Battuta reflects about this in addition to other things that he tells us. So we know that the kingdom started to decline in the latter part of the 14th century, civil war, and that has to do with succession disputes. That is relatively common in these kingdoms, and later on it will become conquered by Songhai. When that will become the dominant kingdom in the region. So finally, with regards to politics, let me tell you about other of the West African kingdoms and states. Not all of them are kingdoms. Some of them are states, meaning that they have institutions, but institutions that are of government that are very sophisticated, but they don't expand territorially very much, and in that way we cannot consider them kingdoms. But there are kingdoms and states in other parts of West Africa in addition to these ones that I just mentioned. So Canaan is one of them. In and around the area of Lake Chad, we say that from the 11th century, the rise of Canaan as a powerful kingdom, a kingdom that later on merged with Borno, and we see the rise of a more powerful state from the 13th century or the 1200s, if you prefer. Farther to the south, areas that later on will become involved in the transatlantic trade in slave Africans. We see Hausa city states. Hausa city states that supply slaves to the north, to the Arabs, and later on will supply slaves to the south, in addition to other things. The Hausa city states are supplying many other things. But from the 11th, 13th century, we see the rise of city states, Hausa-speaking people states in the area of what is today northern Nigeria. Some of these are important city states, Gobir, Kano, Katsina, Zazzau, and so on. And farther even to the south, we see the emergence of the first Yoruba kingdom from the 11th, 12th century, Ife. Ife is one of the most important Yoruba kingdoms and has this symbolic place in the history of Yoruba society. Other Yoruba kingdoms will emerge and coexist at the same time. We don't see a Yoruba empire. What we see is kingdoms coexisting, competing against each other in some cases. But the first one of these kingdoms and the one that basically had influence for the emergence of other Yoruba kingdoms, but also for the emergence of a non-Yoruba kingdom like Benin, it has this important role in the history of this part of West Africa. Another important kingdom will be Benin. Benin that rose to power in and around the same time of Ife. It seems to have been very much influenced by political and cultural developments farther to the north. They're not Yoruba, but there are exchanges and contacts, and Benin seems to have been benefiting from this. This is in the area of southwestern Nigeria and modern-day Benin, right, where we see the Kingdom of Benin. The Kingdom of Benin is perhaps one of the ones that sometimes stands out, because Benin initially participated in the supply of war captives for the transatlantic slave trade, but very early on stopped participated in the supply of slaves. for reasons that are not well understood. Basically, we know that they were supplying slaves to the Portuguese during the period of territorial expansion, that is during the period of warfare, and that they were accumulating war captives and so on. But after that expansion came to an end, they no longer supply slaves, and basically they developed a very rich economy. Their clothes, for example, was of great quality, was appreciated and valued by many people in West Africa. So the Benin cloth was exchanged and sold across different parts of West Africa. And this is another significant kingdom in the area. This is some of the artistic creations of these southern West African kingdoms, like the Ife and Benin, right? And gives you a sense of this level of sophistication of these kingdoms. And very, very finally, religion and society. Actually, religion, don't have time for society. But what I have to tell you about main features of local religions is that there were a great variety of religious beliefs and rituals across West Africa, right? So what were West African religions like? Difficult to tell because there were so many. There were some similarities, right? So we know that in the northern parts of West Africa, the Sudan region, we know that these Sudanic regions were mainly monotheistic, right? And I said mainly monotheistic, but not completely, because we see that, for example, the kings had some kind of divine character, right? And so the kings were not considered to be gods or anything like that, but they had this kind of semi position there. The divine character of the kings in the Sudan, by the way, it's important for the social and political order of these empires like Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. But it's also historically important because it seems that it talks about contacts and connections with developments farther to the east, the part of Egypt and so on. Egypt, the pharaohs, and the pharaohs or kings that were a manifestation of God and had also this divine character. Well, this tradition of having rulers have this divine character was not only exclusive of Egypt, ancient Egypt, but in other parts south of the Sahara, we see similar things, like in the case of the Sudan region. Right, so these Sudanic kings, they have this divine character, and that is important, as I told you, because they will serve as the spiritual and physical protectors of their subjects. Of course, they are physical protectors. They have their armies, and they will protect their subjects with their armies. But what about how they protect you against misfortune? How they protect you against, invisible forces, against, well, basically, it is the king that has that. Through ability, through their rituals and so on, it is believed to have the ability to protect their people. Of course, the king then has to be somebody special. It cannot be anybody, right? It has to be somebody special that people trust, that has this type of abilities that are highly valued to protect their communities, right? Further, in other parts of West Africa, what we see is that more polytheistic religions, right, that were more of the norm. And what's an important thing about West African religions in these polytheistic areas is that the presence of shrines. Shrines, very important religious and political centers. These shrines, like places where people will go for advice. I say here divination was a significant feature of local religious leaders. So in these shrines, you have these religious leaders, and people will visit them, and they will visit them for their knowledge, they will visit them for their advice, and so on. So these shrines also will become not just religious centers, but also political centers, because people moving into these areas for advice and so on, there will be, opportunities for business, and people will settle in and around these shrines areas, and we'll see the development of towns around these shrines. And in these areas of these towns that have at the center, they have these shrines, we will see that these religious leaders will have political power as well. And the last point I want to make to you about these local features is ironworking that I mentioned before. Ironworking knowledge that is believed or was believed to be granted by the gods, or by a god in particular, depending on the different West African society. But it was some kind of divine knowledge, right, that had been given by a specific spiritual force or something like that. And it was associated as such as to religion and rituals. So So this is an important thing. It's almost like telling you, not everybody. This is not knowledge that anybody can harness. It's everybody or everybody can have. It's a special knowledge, right? It's almost like you create a monopoly over this knowledge because of the importance of ironworking. And the last thing I want to tell you about is the Islamic expansion in West Africa, and something that you need to know. So the Islamic expansion. Before much of Africa, or significant parts of Africa, became Christian, and that happens with European colonization from the late 1800s into the early 1900s. There were significant parts of Africa that were Muslim. And those parts of Africa that became Islamized remain Islamized, and that is North Africa, of course, but this is significant parts of West Africa and also parts of East Africa that were Islamized. So the Islamic expansion is a crucial element of the history of Africa, of West Africa during this era. The expansion of Islam, of course, will be favored by independent communities of Muslim traders. Well, of course, the expansion of Africa begins with the arrival of the Arabs to North Africa, the conquest of North Africa, right? But these Arabs are not conquering the area south of the Sahara. So the question is like, how then they convert, West African people converted to Islam? Well, they converted to Islam because of the trans-Saharan trade, because the ties between the Arab traders and the local traders, right? And through those connections, and this is an important thing that you as students of history need to know, whenever there are commercial exchanges, there are also exchanges of things like ideas, culture, religion, and so on, right? So the first converts to Islam in West Africa will be the first West Africans who converted to Islam will be like traders who are trading with the partners from Arab partners from North Africa, right? So the expansion of Islam favor is crucial in that sense. We see that initial expansion of, among traders and later on rulers, right? And this is something that you need to be aware of. Like during much of this period, the vast majority of West Africans maintain their religious beliefs and rituals. It is the rulers, or well, it is first the traders and then the rulers who are fundamentally converted to Islam. We're not going to see a mass conversion to Islam in West Africa until the mid 1700s onwards, right? So in many ways, you could argue that Islam became the religion and remained the religion of the urban elites. Rural areas still did not start to convert, as I mentioned, until the mid 1700s or the mid 18th century. The elite share local and Islamic beliefs, right? That's another thing. The coexistence of religious traditions existed there, yeah. They did not say this as incompatible, and this is one of the things that Arab travelers like Ibn Battuta thought, that this is really perplexing. These people say they're Muslim, but yet they have these ceremonies and so on. Well, West African elites, Muslim elites, did not see these religious traditions as incompatible. So they would embrace certain elements of Islam while maintaining certain elements of their pre-Islamic traditions, right? The Muslim converts largely rejected social and political traditions of Islam. That's another thing that is a significant feature of Islam in West Africa. The clothing, I mean, the dress code, right? That is not something that they're doing. The segregation of sexes, of women and men in public spaces, that's not something that these West African Muslims are doing either, right? So it tells you something about the significant differences between the Islam that we see developing in this part of West Africa and the Islam of other parts, the more orthodox Islam of other parts of the Muslim world. And with that, my presentation comes to an end. Thank you very much. Apologies for taking longer, and especially apologies for the interruptions through the presentation. Renee, I'm not sure if we have any time.
Yes, yes. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Okenve. So I'm sure some of members of our audience or students or even our teachers who may be here might have some burning questions or comments. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube, you can actually put the questions or the comments in the chat box. For those who are in the Zoom meeting now, you can use the raise hand feature, or you can simply type the questions or the comments in the chat. Any questions? Any comments? It was such an interesting presentation. Okay, while our audience thinks about it, Dr. Okenve, I have a question. Okay. Considering that West African societies were obviously well developed by the 15th century, where did the notion of the continent being quote unquote uncivilized come from?
Okay. That is a very interesting question, very complex question as well. But it's something that is relatively recent. It's relatively recent. It's something that starts really and truly from the mid 1700s with the Enlightenment era in France and Western Europe. Basically, the type of transformations that were happening in Western Europe from the mid 1700s, the Enlightenment era, later on the Scientific Revolution, and later on the Industrial Revolution, all of that provided Europeans with a sense of superiority over all the cultures and all the parts of the world, right? But but the superiority wasn't enough. It had to be also validated by diminishing other peoples. And a lot of writings, almost this so-called intellectuals, dedicated on perhaps more time to write about diminishing and belittling all other peoples than they spend about reflecting on their own societies and achievements and so on. But yeah, many of these notions come from these areas. And the developments of the Enlightenment, the Scientific Revolution, the Industrial Revolution also created this notion of what is the standard of civilization, right? And of course, it was a standard that was very much unique because it was happening suddenly in Europe, and Europe was keeping tight control over it. This is another thing, by the way, which is important because the Scientific Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, one of the things that we're going to say is that that facilitated the last stage of European expansion and the colonization of parts of Asia and later on the colonization of parts of Africa. And one of the things that they will do is that we expanded, but we are not going to exchange this knowledge. We are not going to spread this knowledge. We're not going to spread this technology. Throughout most of our history of the humankind, knowledge, ideas have been traveling from one place to another, right? So innovations that take place in one part of the African continent or in one part of the Middle East, they can travel, miles and miles, and other peoples can benefit from this. This is not something that is going to happen. So those developments, later developments, relatively recent developments of the Enlightenment era, Industrial Revolution, and Scientific Revolution were kept as the standard of what is civilized, and also at the same time, it were kept as a monopoly of that was not being shared with non-European peoples, with non-white peoples, and so on. But as I said, this notion of superiority, if you look at the writings, it's not even part of the European intellectual tradition until then. It starts really and truly from the mid 1700s, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Okenve. Any questions? Any comments? Let me just quickly check
before, but I think I don't see it anymore.
Let me just quickly check over by YouTube if there's anything, and there doesn't appear to be. Okay, well, once again, thank you very, very much, Dr. Okenve, for quite an informative and interesting presentation, and certainly thank you, to our audience. Thank you everyone for attending this session. Our next session begins at 11:30 a.m. where we will be looking at the Maroons. And remember, if you are unable to join us here in the Zoom meeting, we're streaming live on our YouTube channel, History UWMona. So with that being said, I will see you at 11:30. And remember, invite your friends, right? Invite your friends, and I'll see you at 11:30. All right, bye-bye.
Thank you, bye-bye.